Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Book of Demons. In the medieval days, just about every single person believed in the existence of supernatural beings, especially demons and spirits. In 1577, the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum was published as an appendix in a book about the nature of demons. It was authored by Dutch physician and demonologist Johann Bayer. It was around this time that the hierarchy of demons we know today became popular. People started to really believe in princes and dukes of hell. There was a whole royal family of demons, some more important than others. It's true that medieval people already believed in witchcraft, devilry, and angels and demons, but this new manuscript pushed things into the realm of the outrageous. Suddenly, there were 69 demons that people could look up in the book. Each demon and their position in hell was impeccably detailed, along with the hours and rituals required to conjure them. You know, in case you wanted to hang out. The book suggested people could conjure whichever demon they wanted from its home in hell, and then force the demon to do their bidding. The thing about this book is that everyone believed it, but it wasn't real. It was just a book written by a physician who had a fascination with the occult. It had no scientific or religious significance, and yet people took it for the truth. Remember that literacy rates were kind of low during this time, and books were expensive, mostly reserved for the upper class, such as noblemen and the clergy. Most of the time, books would be read out loud, and so if you heard these things from someone in a powerful position, you would probably believe them. At the end of the 16th century, medieval Europeans suddenly found themselves locked inside trying to conjure obscure demons like Barbas, Zagan, Volok, Gomori, and who knows what else. Number 9. Urine for diagnosing medical conditions. Medieval physicians had an extremely bizarre way to diagnose medical conditions. It was called uroscopy, or the examination of urine. And while the practice can be traced back 2,000 years to the days of early Rome, it really exploded and became widespread in the Middle Ages. Physicians would take a sample of their patient's urine, scrutinize the color and consistency, and also have a taste. In the Middle Ages, people were about as prudish as ever with certain things, but not others. It was socially unacceptable for a doctor to physically examine a patient. A doctor couldn't just ask their patient to remove their clothes, and so they couldn't see what they were dealing with. One could only hope their injury was somewhere visible on the arms or legs. Otherwise, they were in big trouble. As a workaround, doctors resorted to tasting urine. If they couldn't inspect their patient, they could at least drink their pee. They would get a sense of the taste, the smell, the color, and then make a diagnosis from there. Doctors even had a special wheel of urine that they could consult, cross-referencing shades with tastes and smells. The 17th century physician Thomas Willis claimed that if a patient had diabetes, their urine tasted sweet like honey. As absurd as that sounds, we know it's actually true in the case of diabetes mellitus. Tasting urine was one of the most effective methods of determining certain diseases, and the practice persisted until the end of the 19th century with the invention of chemical analysis. Number 8. Cat hunts. You've heard of witch hunts, but the Middle Ages was not a great time to be a cat. In medieval times, beginning around the 15th century, cats took on a sinister nature in Europe. The feline became a representation of evil, witchery, vulgarity, and female lust. In typical medieval fashion, people believed the only way to get rid of something that was evil was to burn it. For hundreds of years, all the way from England to Poland, people burned cats in massive numbers because they truly believed they were doing the work of the Lord. Killing cats was seen as a benevolent act, the same as burning witches or performing an exorcism. In Belgium, there was an event that took place on May 2nd every single year called Kattenstoot, or the Festival of Cats. The townspeople would gather up all the cats they could find, climb to the top of a belfry, and then throw them onto the street and set them on fire. It was another brutal and senseless tradition that medieval Europeans reveled in. The Festival of Cats was abolished in 1817, but it wasn't the only festival in Europe created specifically for tormenting felines. King Louis XIV reinstated the annual cat bonfire in 1648, an event that was received with roaring applause by the French. It was the French who took cat torture to perverse levels. It may have started as a way to banish wicked spirits and to ward away evil, but the truth is that medieval people really liked the sport of it, especially in France. They would hang cats in wicker cages, set them on fire, and then take the embers and ashes home for good luck. And on that note, it's shout-out time! I wanted to give a big shout-out to Francis Stephen Peralta and Ben Palmy. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the family. Number 7. Lemuria. At some point in the Middle Ages, the belief in a mysterious continent started to spread throughout social circles. It became known as Lemuria and was said to be a lost continent far from Europe in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Lemuria was once home to a race of extinct humans who had 4 arms, male and female reproductive organs, and were a weird hybrid of humans and lemurs. In simple terms, Europeans in the Middle Ages believed in a lost land of monkey people. As rumors spread, the legends got even more bizarre, and scientists started getting very interested. The idea flourished, and as recently as the 19th century, people still believed it was hiding in the ocean somewhere. In 1864, British zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater wrote a paper about Lemuria and published it in the Quarterly Journal of Science. Around that same time, German biologist Ernst Haeckel claimed Lemuria was a secret land from which early Homo sapiens migrated out of Asia. People started to think of Lemuria as the cradle of humanity. Fast forward to 2013, and the idea of Lemuria was discarded as ridiculous. But scientists did find evidence on Mauritius that there once was a large landmass in the Indian Ocean, so the legend of Lemuria almost turned out to be true, just not the part about the ancient race of Lemurians. Number 6. Obsessed with eels. One of the most important commodities in medieval England was the eel. There are very few eels left in Britain these days, except for the occasional eel pie you might come across in London. But over 500 years ago, eels were an obsession. These serpent-like fish were used by medieval citizens for everything from purchasing food to paying their rent. To give you an idea of just how much the landscape has changed since the Middle Ages, listen to this. Eels were once one of the most popular foods in England. People ate more eels than any other freshwater fish. They could be found in pretty much every body of water in the country. They were very abundant and easy to catch, so everyone ate them all the time. The English pulled so many eels out of the rivers, they are now almost extinct. In the 11th century, landlords would take all kinds of crazy payments for room and board. You could pay your rent in eggs, spice, corn, or even beer. At the end of the 11th century, there were more than 540,000 eels being paid as rent in England every year. Number 5. Sacred defense. Throughout history, religious institutions have never been safe. This included churches in Europe, which were not always the sanctuaries we think of them as today. In most of Europe's history, churches and monasteries found themselves the victims of greedy groups of villains and invading armies. Starting around the Middle Ages, countries started building fortified churches to protect them. Nobody's sure exactly where it started, but the fad took off with great enthusiasm in Transylvania in Romania. Throughout the Middle Ages, over 300 fortified churches were built here. These were churches and monasteries enclosed within massive fortifications. Elaborate stone walls, defensive towers, battlements, and soldiers were put in a place to protect the priests and monks and all the treasures kept inside. The whole belief was that if the churches were fortified, they couldn't be razed to the ground by an opposing force. It was a big deal to protect these holy structures because they were usually a significant source of income for a particular place. The church was big business, and protecting it with strong walls proved to be a genius solution. In Transylvania, in a region that was frequently besieged by angry Ottomans, the fortified churches were a massive improvement. People no longer had to live in constant fear of being pillaged and destroyed. Number 4. Mad Mercury. In the days of the Roman Empire, people poisoned themselves with lead. Centuries later, in medieval Europe, people were still poisoning themselves with lead. It wasn't only the peasants either, but many of the most affluent members of society. And it was all because of mercury, a substance that no one believed could possibly be the cause of so much death and insanity. These days, we all know the truth about Mercury. It damages the nervous system, leading to a dip in intelligence, poor health, and potential insanity. Nobody knew this in the Roman Empire. They used lead like it was going out of style. And in the Middle Ages, they continued to use lead in everything from medicine to pottery. Mercury was used by physicians who believed it could cure the worst diseases spreading throughout medieval Europe, mainly syphilis and leprosy. But it was also used in artwork and paint and to glaze pottery. The glazed pottery was used to hold food and drink at fancy parties, and the lead was steadily seeping mercury. A group of researchers recently investigated just how prevalent mercury poisoning was in the Middle Ages. They looked at 207 skeletons from graveyards throughout Denmark and Germany. They looked at both wealthy towns and rural villages. What they found was that people in the wealthy townships had been significantly more affected by mercury than those in poorer neighborhoods. Researcher Kari Lund Rasmussen says it was most likely because of the glazed pottery, highly toxic, yet in high demand because it looked so beautiful. Number 3. Necromancers. Up until the 13th century in Europe, there wasn't a heavy belief in witches, malevolent spirits, sorcery, or the practice of magic. It was something known, but there wasn't widespread belief in vampires, monsters, and necromancers. People did believe in witches, but they weren't frightened of their children being carried off on broomsticks in the night. That all changed in the 13th century. Latin translations of texts about magic and astrology made their way into Europe. Books were easier to get than any time before, and many of the books available were ones on demonology and witchcraft. This reignited the belief in sorcery and ultimately led to the hysteria of the witch hunts later on. It all started with the distinguishing of two types of magic. The experts came up with natural magic, something that was more scientific and compatible with Christianity. Then there was necromancy, also known as black magic. This was something used to control spirits or devils, something used by practitioners to harness the power of the spirit world. The point is that in the Middle Ages, necromancers were seen as a very real threat. These were people who could supposedly use secret knowledge to gain dominion over demons and beings of evil. They could communicate with the dead, summon spirits to do their bidding, and were imbued with great power from beyond the grave. And while necromancers never truly existed, at least scientists say they definitely didn't, medieval people were still terrified of them. Number 2. The medieval zodiac. The zodiac was far more popular in the Middle Ages than it is today. You might know a few people who are obsessed with their astrological sign and looking at their horoscope, but in medieval Europe, it was a collective obsession. Just about every person believed everything that happened in their life was dictated by the sun, moon, and stars. What Saturn and Mars were doing that day in space directly affected what would happen to them on Earth. The 12 zodiac signs were the same 500 years ago as they are today, but they were used for much more than just giving a vague description. For example, take a look at this horoscope from the late 15th century, part of an astrology guide housed at the Amsterdam University's Special Collections Library. The horoscope is for an Aquarius. It says that when the sun is in Aquarius, meaning the southwest, one can build houses, sow their crops, plant their crops, and move into a new house. You can also let blood and do anything that will last only a short amount of time. Quarreling and battling is neither good nor bad, although one is not recommended to travel a long way. One can buy and sell cattle and any other animal so long as it has 4 feet. It's a good time to have weddings, but a bad time to practice skills. All of this information would directly affect when people would do all of these things, from getting married to selling a cow. Number 1. The flat Earth. One of the most common beliefs in the Middle Ages was that the Earth is flat. Except that's not true at all, and is a common modern misconception about people in the Middle Ages. It's also not true that Christopher Columbus had difficulty funding his expedition to the West because people were worried that he would fall off the world and vanish. In reality, as strange as the Middle Ages were, not everybody was a believer in a flat Earth. Columbus and most other educated people in Europe were well aware the Earth was round. In fact, the Greeks were the ones who realized the Earth is a globe in the 4th century BC and calculated the dimensions of the planet. If that's true, why do most people assume medieval Europeans were flat Earth enthusiasts? The answer comes to us from the late 19th century. Professor Jeffrey Russell says the myth of Columbus and the flat Earth came from a man named Washington Irving, who wrote A History of Columbus in 1828. Irving claimed the experts in the 15th century refused funding for the voyage on account of their belief in a flat Earth. Irving made these claims as part of a 19th century rebellion against the church and its history of science bashing. Thanks for watching! What do you think was the craziest thing people from medieval days believed in? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Bye!